The house wren tells me that it's almost 6 o'clock.
Thank you for joining us for our June Arkansas Valley Audubon Society program. I'm Megan Wilbar, Museum Coordinator for the InfoZone Museum at the Rawlings Library. We're happy to have Michael Painter joining us to introduce bats of the world, bats of Colorado, and bats of the Pike and San Isabel National Forest. Michael Painter has been a wildlife biologist for South Platte Ranger District on the Pike National Forest since 2009. She grew up in Colorado and went to Colorado State University for a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology. She earned her master's degree in forestry at Northern Arizona University, where she studied the foraging ecology of spotted bats on the Kaibab Plateau. Conservation and understanding of native species is the central tenet of Michael's career. She's glad to be part of an agency like the Forest Service that helps to perpetuate those values for all members of society. She will be answering questions at the end, so please type them into the chat box. Also joining me tonight, as you'll see, is Dr. Peg Rooney. She's the president of the Arkansas Valley Audubon Society and the creator for this series of monthly programs. Thank you, Peg, for your continued efforts to bring us great content. And I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Megan. Well, I want to welcome you all here tonight and remind you that pollinators are in trouble. And pollinators are birds and bats, bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, wasps, even flies. And there's been a huge die-off of insects around the world, usually primarily due to climate change and global warming and the overuse of pesticides and herbicides. If we don't have insects, the basic foundation of the food chain, then we don't have pollinators. If we don't have pollinators, we don't have human food crops. If we don't have food, we don't have humans. So what can we do? Well, excuse me. Well, we can support efforts to address climate change. Let's vote, elect people who believe that global warming is real. Cut down our use of pesticides in our gardens. So we can use a soap and water spray on the bugs. Lady beetles, ladybugs, those are natural predators, natural pest control. We can cut down the use of herbicides. Leave some of those dandelions alone. They're good nectar sources for butterflies and bees, especially as early spring as they're emerging. Another thing you might consider is joining the Xerces Society. So XERCES.org. The Xerces Society protects insects and their habitats. And you also might consider joining us, the Audubon Society. We care not only about birds, but all wildlife. So there's membership information on our website, Southern Colorado Birds, abbreviated SOCO, S-O-C-O, so socobirds.org. Let's work on keeping those monarch butterflies flying and those bats pollinating agave plants so we can have our tequila. And speaking of bats, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and she's going to tell us a little bit about bats. Michael?
All right. Awesome. Thank you for that great introduction, Megan, and good words of wisdom, Peg. Thank you for that. I'm glad you guys are joining us for our talk today. I'm going to explain a little bit about bats here in North America, a little bit around the world, and also about our bats here locally in Colorado. So with that, let's get started. So bats are a highly successful and diverse group that make up about 1/5 of all mammal species on the planet. They occupy every continent except Antarctica and are even found above the Arctic Circle. Their unique ability to fly has allowed them to become the only native mammals on many islands like Hawaii, Guam, and New Zealand. Although bats share some basic characteristics, they do actually come in all shapes and sizes and fit many different ecological roles. As Peg was talking about, bats do pollinate flowers, they disperse seeds, they control insects, they hunt mice, they catch fish, And there are just 3 species that are sanguinivorous, which means that they feed exclusively on blood. The smallest bat, Kitty's hognose bat in Southeast Asia, is also the world's smallest mammal. The largest bats are flying foxes, and that is a general term that we use to apply to several species of fruit-eating bats. As a group, bats are classified in the order Chiroptera, and they began evolving separate from carnivores, ungulates, and whales more than 60 million years ago. The term Chiroptera is derived from the Greek words for hand and wing. Bats are the only mammals that are truly able to fly, and they are very good at it. Most bats fly at slow to moderate speeds, even hovering at times, but a few species can fly faster than any bird, reaching horizontal speeds of up to 100 miles per hour. All bats are nocturnal and they can use echolocation, but many of the fruit bats actually use vision more than echolocation to navigate. All bats do have excellent vision, but they are also able to navigate in complete and total darkness using only their echolocation. There are different bats have different social structures, but generally they are either colonial, which means they like to hang out in groups, or they are solitary, which means they just generally hang out alone. The size of bat colonies can be just a few individuals that are snuggled together, or it can reach thousands or even millions of individuals all sheltering in the same feature. One of the most famous sites in the United States is Bracken Cave in Texas, which is home to 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats. And here in the San Luis Valley of Colorado, the Orient Mine is a summer home for 250,000 Mexican free-tailed bats. Unlike other mammals their size, bats are long-lived, and in the wild they can survive anywhere from 10 to 30 years. They also have a low reproductive rate, with most females only raising 1 pup every year or 2. A few species can have twins, but that is rare. So besides having the superpowers of flight and echolocation, nearly all bats can let their body temperature match that of the ambient air around them, or they can use their own energy to keep their body warmer or cooler than the ambient temperature. Since they can switch between ectothermic and endothermic behavior, they are considered facultative endotherms. This ability allows them to conserve their valuable energy reserves without having to carry a massive amount of extra fat. Bats use ectothermy in 2 different ways. Where conditions are warm enough, bats tend to seek out microsites where the ambient temperature is ideal for remaining alert and active. But then when conditions are too cold and they aren't active, their metabolism will slow down and they will fall into torpor. And during torpor, the animal's heart rate, respiration, and other body functions slow down or even shut off completely. This can be useful for surviving hibernation through the long winter, but it also means that they're vulnerable to external threats while they are essentially incapacitated. And at least 97% of bat species are known to use torpor to manage their energy expenditures. With their abilities to fly and use torpor, bats have been able to exploit a wide variety of habitats. Some species stay year-round in colder climates where they use hibernation to rest through the winter while they live off of their fat reserves. And there are other species that migrate to warmer latitudes in the winter. And then there are still others who simply never leave the warm climates where they can find a supply of food all year round. Although most folks know that bats fly at night, many people don't know where bats spend their days. Some species roost in caves and abandoned mines because they offer the right temperature and the safety from predators. But bats also can find the right conditions in rock crevices of cliff faces or in the nooks under talus slopes. They will crawl into hollow trees or just under the bark of old snags, dead trees in the forest. Some others prefer just to hang in the foliage of trees and large shrubs, and still others have adapted to use human structures like buildings and bridges. So here we have zoomed into North America, where there are 44 species of bats native to the United States. Most of our bats are insectivorous, like this Yuma myotis here that you can see eating a moth. But there are 3 species in North America, like this lesser long-nosed bat, that also eat pollen, nectar, and fruit from cacti and agaves in the southwestern deserts. The Southwest is also the part of North America that supports the highest species richness of bats because of its latitude, topography, land mass, and vegetation types. Here in Colorado, we have 19 species of bats, and they are all insectivorous. Since our state is situated across the Rocky Mountains, we have some of the more eastern species as well as some of the more western species in North America. For example, here on the left is the eastern red bat, which is a type of tree bat that roosts only in the foliage of trees and shrubs. It is very common east of the Great Plains, but it can also use the cottonwood forests that grow along the rivers like the South Platte and the Arkansas, all the way up into the foothills. This bat is migratory and solitary, and it's one of the few species that can have twins. Interesting note, I actually caught one of these a few years ago in Waterton Canyon during fall migration. It was very exciting. On the right is a big free-tailed bat, which lives in the canyon and desert country of the Southwest from California to Texas and Mexico. This bat is colonial and roosts in cracks of tall cliffs. They are probably migratory to some extent, but their seasonal movement has not really been that well studied. You could probably guess from their long, narrow wing shape that these bats are very fast flyers. They are among the larger bats that hunt very high up in the air for large beetles, bugs, and moths. There are other smaller bats with shorter and broader wings that are better at flying very slow and maneuvering around and under the tree canopies. Although many bats have more localized ranges, either to the east, the west, the north, or the south, a few species are actually almost ubiquitous across the continent. These 2 bats here belong to 2 different genera, but they are both able to use a variety of different habitat types, so they occupy a very large part of North America. The big brown bat on the left is sort of like the coyote of the bat world. They can tolerate a wide range of climate conditions, and they have adapted very well to human-built environments. They are colonial, and they can roost almost anywhere. They are not migratory, but they can hibernate in the north or stay active in the southern part of the country. Hibernation sites can be at mines, caves, and even deeper cracks in the cliff faces and the rock outcroppings here in the Front Range. They weigh about 17 grams, and they eat larger beetles, bugs, and moths. On the right, we have the little brown bat. This guy will also roost in almost any structure from caves to mines and snags and buildings and bridges. They are also colonial and non-migratory, but they remain further north and they must hibernate. They weigh about 7 grams and they eat smaller insects like mosquitoes, midges, and small moths. So here are a few more species that we have on the Pike National Forest. The hoary bat up in the top left corner is one of our largest bats in Colorado. It is migratory and solitary. It's a tree bat like the eastern red bat that we saw earlier. The interesting thing about hoary bats is that the 2 sexes will split up across the country in the summertime, The females mostly go to the east and the males mostly go to the west of the Rockies. They only roost in the foliage of trees and shrubs, and they have really striking coloration that serves to actually camouflage them as a pine cone or a bit of a dried leaf in the canopy. They weigh about 25 grams and they eat mostly moths, but they will eat other insects as well. In the center on the top, we have the silver-haired bat. It is widespread across the US and Canada, and they are usually solitary, but they may form maternity colonies of females with their young. They will roost in snags, at the entrances to caves or mines, in rock crevices, or in open buildings, like a shed or a barn. They are somewhat migratory, but also known to hibernate here in Colorado. They weigh about 12 grams, and they eat a variety of medium-sized insects. The long-eared myotis on the right is a small forest-dwelling bat that is very good at flying slow and plucking insects off the foliage of trees and shrubs. With their longer ears, they will even stop echolocating altogether and just listen for the sounds of their prey so that they can sneak up and snap the bug right off of its leaf. They are associated with ponderosa pine forests in the western United States, and they roost in snags, caves, mines, and other similar structures. Their winter use patterns are not really well understood. It is possible that they may hibernate in Colorado because they have been seen here in late fall, but none have ever been found in any winter hibernacula. It's also possible that they migrate elevationally to hibernate in milder climates. Then in the bottom left here, we have the Brazilian free-tailed bat, also called the Mexican free-tailed bat. They are highly colonial, always roosting in groups of hundreds or thousands or even millions of individuals. Colorado includes just barely the northern part of their range. They are mostly associated with warmer climates like what you find in the deserts and the tropics from here to South America. And then finally, in the bottom on the center, we have the Townsend's big-eared bat, which is a species of concern because they are strongly reliant on caves and mines for hibernation sites, and their small summer colonies in caves, mines, or buildings can be easily disturbed. These bats specialize in eating moths, and even though they are widely distributed across Western North America, they are not really common anywhere. Next, we have the fringed myotis. This is a Western species found in lower elevations and woodlands up to the ponderosa pine forest type. They live in small colonies, and they will roost under the bark of trees, of dead trees and snags. They roost in caves and mines, and occasionally they will use buildings. They are not very migratory, and like the Townsend's big-eared bat, they are widely distributed, but not really common anywhere. The long-legged myotis is able to tolerate colder summer temperatures than other bats. So they are found at our higher elevations and actually almost up to tree line. They roost in trees and buildings and caves and mines. They do hibernate using primarily caves, mines, and sometimes talus slopes. The western small-footed myotis is one of our smallest bats on the Pike National Forest. They weigh only 4 grams. They are colonial and can roost almost anywhere. And they hibernate in caves and mines and probably in cracks in the rock and cliff faces. They are widespread and common across Western North America. Zoonotic diseases are pathogens that can be transmitted between people and animals. Some zoonoses sicken both animals and people, and others only make the host sick. For example, there's avian influenza, salmonella, Lyme disease, West Nile virus, plague, hantavirus, and anthrax. These are all diseases I'm sure everybody has heard about in the news at one time or another. Zoonoses are common all around the world, and the US is really no exception. Rabies is a zoonotic disease that can infect and kill any mammal. However, certain groups are more likely to transmit the virus and become reservoirs where the virus can persist. In the US and Canada, the most common rabies reservoirs are bats, foxes, skunks, and raccoons. There are oral vaccine programs that work well to control rabies in urban populations of mesocarnivores like skunks and raccoons. So where there's an outbreak, there's something to be done about it. So most people don't actually cross paths with sick foxes or skunks or raccoons. Countries like the US have also nearly eliminated rabies in dogs and cats with strict vaccination requirements and successful animal control programs. But unfortunately, there's no vaccine program for wild bats. But never fear, because infection rates among bats is very, very low, less than 0.5%. All the bats that you see flying around in the night sky or roosting quietly under the eaves of your house are perfectly healthy. There are other diseases that we're all acutely aware of. The novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, that causes the very human disease of COVID-19. Jury's still out on exactly what the origin of SARS-CoV-2 is, but there is a possibility that a predecessor of the SARS-CoV-2 virus probably originated in a horseshoe bat in Asia, but that original virus likely went through a transformation in one or more intermediate hosts that allowed a new virus to emerge and become infectious in people. It is not possible for people to get COVID directly from any bat. If you would like to learn more about this particular topic, I have a link at the end of this talk to a great video from Bat Conservation International. I highly recommend it. Of course, I know all of you folks care a lot about the animals and environments around you, so I imagine some of you are wondering what to do when you see a bat that is in distress. I would say, first of all, protect yourself. Although bats are small and they aren't going to tear off your fingers, they do have sharp teeth and they can be very bitey. A bat that can't fly away very well could be sick, so you should use something to protect your hands while you gently place the bat in a box with some fabric for padding. You can call the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department and they will help you get the bat to a wildlife rehabilitator. You should also call CPW if you ever find a dead bat so they can determine the cause of death. And part of the reason why CPW is trying to keep close track of bats is that they have been found dead. The reason why CPW is trying to keep close track of bats that have been found dead in the state is because we are watching closely for the invasion of a disease that has been killing North American bats by the millions since 2006. And that is white nose syndrome. It is a bat disease caused by a cold adapted fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, or PD for short. It was first detected in caves near Albany, New York in 2006, and it appears as a white powdery looking substance on the bat's skin, most noticeable on the bat's wings and muzzle. And since then, white nose syndrome has been spreading across the continent, primarily by bat-to-bat contact, but also probably unintentionally assisted by humans. In some places, almost entire colonies of millions of bats have been wiped out in 1 or 2 winters. Excuse me. The map that I have demonstrated here shows the spread of white nose syndrome since it was first discovered. And the different colors show the progression each year as the disease is detected in different counties and provinces across the continent. The spores of PD are really hardy and they can survive all sorts of inhospitable conditions to be transported on fur, in soil, or on clothing to new places where distant conditions are suitable for its growth. We don't know where it came from or how it got here to North America, but it was likely transmitted somehow from Europe or Asia. It has been found on bats over there in Europe and Asia, but not with the devastating effects like we see here in North America. White nose is kind of like athlete's foot because the fungus just grows into the bat's skin, not just on the surface. However, it is different from athlete's foot in that PD only grows in cold and humid conditions like damp caves. Bats that hibernate are susceptible to white nose because their body temperature is only a few degrees above freezing while they are in torpor, and their immune system is then turned off for several months. PD is not toxic to the bats. Instead, it causes bats to repeatedly rouse from torpor, to scratch and move around, and this extra activity uses a lot of their stored energy. If they wake up from torpor too much, then the bat will die from starvation before the winter is over. Although mortality rates at individual sites can be very close to 100%, individual bats can get lucky and survive the winter. If they do, then the immune system is able to clear the infection during the summer, but it's really unknown how much that effort affects their ability to prepare for the next winter. It's also unknown if some bat species need those large hibernation colonies to persist in the long run. Bats, of course, face lots of other threats besides disease. Primarily amongst them are habitat destruction. Habitat destruction can take shape in many forms, including total deforestation, filling in abandoned mines, and vandalism in caves and mines are also examples. So why should we care about bats? They are natural, free, and effective insect pest control. As Peg mentioned at the beginning of this talk, they do pollinate many different species of plants, mostly in the tropics or in the desert Southwest. They also provide seed dispersal services, and bats have even provided us with insights for medical advancements. For example, the vampire bats in South America, their saliva has an anticoagulant in it that's been used to treat people. Well, not the saliva, but derivatives of that created in the lab have been used to create treatments for blood clots. So here I've got links. I can share this slide with anybody who would like a copy of it to get these links for more resources about Colorado bats. Also, the North American Bat Monitoring Program is going on across all of Canada, the US, and Mexico. There's also information about white nose syndrome, and there's that link that I talked about to the video of bats and COVID-19. So with that, I'll finish up and ask Peg if there's any questions I can answer.
All right. Thank you, Michael. That was really interesting. We do have some questions for you, and there's still time for anybody watching. Just type them into the chat box and we can answer them. But just to get it started, why do bats hang upside down?
Very good question. Bats, I'm going to change my slides there. Okay. Yes, bats are, like I said, they're very good flyers. They're not very good walkers, though. So bats evolved to spend most of their time up in the air or up high. That's a safe place for them to hang out, up on a cliff face or up in a tree or up at the ceiling of a cave or abandoned mine. And their feet are adapted. Their knees are actually twisted around the other direction. They have all the same bones in their body that you and I do, but they're just modified a little bit. And so their knees are twisted around the backwards so that they can curve their feet inward and hang from structures. So when they're ready to fly, all they have to do is let go and they will fall into the air and spread their wings and take off. So it's a very efficient way to take flight, and they're not very safe on the grounds. It's much safer for them to be up high.
That's, and how do you get a bat out of a house?
Good question as well. That's a very common question. Bats, unlike birds, bats are actually really good at navigating enclosed spaces. So generally the best thing to do when you have a bat in the house is to open up the doors to the outside, or if you have windows without screens on them, open up all of the doors and windows where the bat would be able to easily fly out. And then you can place yourself on the opposite end of the room from where that door or open window is. And just, you can wave your hands or get a towel or something just to kind of wave around you and encourage the bat to move away from you and towards the open door. And they will eventually find their way out. They're not going to find very comfortable places to roost inside your house. If the bat does land on the ground and doesn't seem to be able to fly away easily enough, you can do what I said earlier in the talk. If you were to cover your hand with a thick leather glove or get a towel and lay that gently over the bat, and you can scoop it up and move it outside and gently place it on a tree or some sort of structure up about eye level, so that the bat isn't sitting on the ground.
Yeah, that's good. What's the ideal location for a bat house? And there's another question too. Are bat houses helpful to bats? And where's the ideal place to put one? So it's a three-part.
Right. Yes. Bat houses are definitely helpful. There are a wide variety of designs for bat houses. There are nature preserves and public land areas where bat mansions essentially have been constructed that will house several hundred bats. But usually the individual homeowner or private property owner is only going to be putting up a relatively small bat house that's maybe a couple feet square and only maybe 4 inches thick. It's the kind of bat house that you can put up on a pole. That's usually the best place to put a bat house, is up on a pole, or if you have a barn or a fairly large shed, you can hang it up on the side of the barn or the shed. Here in Colorado, it's fairly warm in the summertime, so you don't want to place it in full sun on a south-facing slope or south-facing side of a building. You would probably want to put it more on the east side of a structure, so that it gets that nice warm morning sun, but it's not baking in the noonday and afternoon sun. If you put it on a pole, just because it's got air movement past the bat house on a pole, you don't necessarily have to worry so much about the orientation that way. So those are two suggestions for where to hang bat houses, and they should be fairly high up, like probably a couple stories up.
Okay. Do bats get dizzy hanging upside down?
They don't actually. Part of their adaptation is that their blood vessels in their head and in their body have special, essentially sphincters inside the blood vessels to keep the blood from pooling in their head, so they don't get a headache from hanging upside down all day.
Well, it's good because they're doing it all the time. So
yeah. They thought of everything.
yeah. Let's see. How does echolocation work?
Echolocation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Echolocation is a fascinating ability. Generally, you can think about it anytime you've ever been in, like, even a gym, like a large echoey space. If you yell and you hear your echo of your voice bouncing off the walls around you, that's essentially the same thing that bats are doing. Bats yell either through their mouth, or some actually yell through their nose, but they generate a sound using their voice box that is very, very loud, like as loud as a chainsaw. But it's also very high frequency. So most bats use a frequency that is above the limits of human hearing. There are a few bats that have echolocation frequencies that are just barely at the top of our hearing, and people with good hearing in the high range can hear bats echolocate. But what bats do is they essentially yell, and that sound travels through the air and bounces off of objects in front of them and comes back to the bat. And with their large, very sensitive ears, the bats receive that echo information, and in their brain, that echo information is actually translated into an image that they are then able to respond to, whether it's moving away from them or if it's a small diameter, large diameter thing. This is how they tell if they're chasing after a moth or if they're chasing after a mosquito. This is how they avoid things like branches in the trees. So their voice essentially generates the waves that their brain needs to translate the information that bounces back to them. So it's similar in the way that our eyes use light waves to translate an image inside our brain. But instead of using light waves, they're using sound waves to generate that image in their mind.
That's really interesting. The last question that's on here is, bats get a bad rap. How can we change the perception of them?
Tell everyone that you love bats and that they're nothing to be afraid of. You know, they're wild animals just like all the other wild animals out there, and they happen to be even more susceptible to a lot of disturbances that are generated by humans. So I would say spread the word amongst your friends and relations, casual acquaintances. Bats are fascinating and necessary, and they deserve as much respect as any of us. I would say also you can check out groups like Bat Conservation International. They operate 100% on donations. So you can become a member, you can adopt a bat. They have adopt a bat programs. So funding goes a long ways towards habitat conservation and research for these species.
I thought it was interesting, the percentage of bats that carry rabies, that, you know, I was always told that it was much higher. So it's, you know, just information like that is kind of important that everybody knows.
I think part of the reason why the perception about bats carrying rabies is so skewed is that generally the average person just doesn't come across bats. They're not readily observable unless you kind of know what you're looking for. And even then, like when I'm out walking in the evening, I see bats flying around me all the time, but with just my own senses, I have no way of knowing what species of bats they are. I just know it's a bat. You really have to have the bat in hand and able to identify it accurately to species. You can do some species identification using ultrasonic detectors, which is an electronic device that can hear in that very high frequency range and then translate those frequencies to something lower that we can hear, and also draw it on a screen, essentially create a sonogram. And you can get some species identification from those sonograms. But bats are hard to observe. They're small. They're active almost exclusively at night. They have to hide during the day for their own safety. So most people are just not aware of them. And then the bat that they do see, sitting on the sidewalk in the middle of the day, something is wrong probably with that bat. And so those are the ones that get turned into the state for testing. So it makes it seem like lots of bats might be sick, when in reality, you're talking about millions of individual bats sort of flying around us all the time, every evening, and hardly any of those are sick.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. And we have several comments about how fascinating it is. So thank you so much for doing this and helping us change the perception of bats. So we appreciate it.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Take care.